and I am finally home. I've gotten 3 hours of sleep, 3.5 hours of sleep. I think I got like a 15-minute nap around 10 o'clock this morning before they came in to discharge Tessie from the pediatric ICU because last night was insane. So I'll start at the beginning. Bedtime last night. We hooked Tessie up to her medical monitor and we hooked Tessie up to her Owlet monitor, and that is shortly after that is when things got a little bit out of control. And that is because both of her monitors started going off and they were saying that she was hypoxic, that she was having desats down into the 70s. And I screenshotted the Owlet so that they could see, because they can't see, her medical monitor doesn't record anything. That's been the problem over and over again, is that for all that it works and it alarms, it doesn't seem to work correctly recording things, and it never has since she was a tiny baby. And so we started taking screenshots of the Owlet and what it was saying, and at the same time it said she had oxygen saturation of 76, and I picked her up and started rubbing her back, and then I handed her off to Paul so that I could look at the oxygen saturation levels too as her alarms are all going off. And Paul was rubbing her back and we could see that her oxygen saturation levels were going up really, really slowly, and she was like totally limp. She was like this little noodle. She wasn't blue, but she was just like floppy, and her eyes were kind of like half open, which isn't really totally unusual for her when she sleeps. And she just was kind of not waking up, which again isn't unusual for when this is happening for us. I thought it took about 5 minutes for us to get her oxygen up to 90, but when I looked at the screenshots that I took, I'd taken 2 screenshots and they were about 5 minutes apart. They were 4 minutes apart. And the first one she's at 76, and the next one that I took 4 minutes later, her oxygen saturation level is 85. And I think it went pretty quickly from 85 up to 90, and then she went back to normal and we put her back down. And so then she's back up to 97, and I come back in here, and I mean, we are used to her having apneas. This isn't like, this has been life since she was 6 months old when she had her diagnosis. So we don't really freak out about these things, although the fact that she was in the 70s did make me really, really, really uncomfortable. It also didn't make me like panic and freak out. And you have to understand that when I call her doctor, the answer is usually like, you could take her to the ER, but use your better judgment. And I know that when in the past, when we've gone to the ER a few times, it's usually like we put her in the car, we go to the ER, putting her in the car, going into the ER, wakes her up. When you get to the ER, she's wide awake. When she's wide awake, she's not having breathing problems. Her oxygen saturation is at 100%. Besides, she's upset, she's crying. That makes her oxygen saturation absolutely perfect. And when you get to the ER, they're like, this is a healthy baby, why are you here? And so we try to avoid that because it's just kind of, in the past it's been a really useless experience and nothing good has ever come out of going to the ER. That's Maggie, and Paul's out there with her. She's had a rough day because she's ready to go back to school. That was the first one. About 5 minutes after we put her back down, the monitor started alarming. Her medical monitor started alarming that she wasn't breathing. It alarmed about 5 times in 5 minutes that she had not breathed. Each of those times she had not breathed for 20 seconds. And each of those times she responded to the medical alarm. She started breathing immediately. Oh no, baby, come on. We need some breathing. Baby. When the alarm went off, and I went out and saw that she was actually not breathing and adjusted it just to make sure. It stopped again. She was breathing, she was sleeping, and I came back in here and I have my door open and I was doing the video that I'd been doing before. It was the clothing haul, and I had clothes all over the bed, and I was kind of just trying to get it done and out of the way so that I could put everything off of the bed and maybe try to get a few minutes of sleep just in case we were actually going to go to the hospital. We've had a lot of events and we have we've avoided going to the hospital for about 1.5 years now with her events. So I really at that point didn't think we were going to the hospital, but it was kind of in my mind too, because the last few events have seemed like they've been getting worse and worse. And so it's been something that I've thought about more, I guess, the last few times that it's happened, because it seems like, okay, if this continues in this direction, I think we're going to have to start taking her to the hospital when this happens. If it gets a little harder to wake her up each time, if it gets a little harder to get her to breathe each time, we're going to be going to the hospital soon. We're going to be calling 911 soon. Well, and the natural conclusion to that is like, we're going to be doing CPR soon if it keeps getting harder to get her to start breathing again. Like if rubbing her chest gets harder and harder, I know that eventually I'm going to be doing rescue breathing. A few minutes later, after I came back in here, it alarmed a second time for oxygen desaturation, and the owlet alarmed with it, saying that it was below 80%. By the time I got to her, it was already at 81%, and we picked her up again. We repeated the whole thing again. This time her oxygen levels did go up faster, but Paula and I looked at each other and basically said, like, if it happens a third time, hospital. And she had a few more apneas, which again, the apneas aren't such a big deal. We are used to those, and we put her back down after her oxygen saturation went back up, and that if they didn't take her out right away, that this was his personal cell phone number, that I should call him back. Once we finally do get her to like wake up and really snap out of it, that's usually the end of it. It's just how hard it is to get her to wake up. And if I hadn't been so freaked out and I'd actually thought about it, I probably would have realized that. Like in the morning when I woke up there, I was kind of like, it makes sense. It makes sense that she didn't have any more apneas because we finally got her to wake up. And I felt kind of silly for having brought her in, even though she had like all those desats in the 70s. But it was also kind of good because I did get to talk to the PICU doctors. And usually when I talk to just any of our other doctors, everybody says the same thing, which is basically like, trust your instincts. If she has too many apneas, just take her to the ER and go to the ER. And talking to the doctors in the ICU, they kind of had more concrete advice, which was more like in her bed, and she was laying in her bed. I, again, kind of readjusted all the straps, because that's kind of something that we automatically do. We just check all of the connections, check all the straps, just to make sure it's not that. And we always kind of look at her to make sure it's actually not, that she's not breathing, and she wasn't breathing during these. And one of the reasons you do that is also so you can tell the doctors, like, yeah, we witnessed her not breathing. We turned the lights on and we looked at her. And also that she wasn't blue. Again, she was just like floppy noodle baby. And then I came back in here and sat down, and a short while later, it did it a third time, and I knew that we were going to go, that I was going to be going to the hospital. And I picked up my phone and, well, I went out there and grabbed her and handed her to Paul, and I was rubbing her back and he was rubbing her back, and we slowly got her oxygen level up. I unhooked her from everything once we got her oxygen level up. Paul took her outside. I was on the phone with the pediatrician call line. Sometimes when we've called, they call back 10 seconds later, and sometimes they call back within half an hour. And I wanted him to know that I wanted a call back, but it didn't have to be like an immediate thing, that it could be like a half-hour thing, because I knew I was already going to the hospital. So that's basically what I told him. Like, this isn't like a frantic thing. I'm not frantic about this. I already know I'm going to the hospital. I just want her doctor to know that this is what's happened and that we're heading to the hospital. And he goes, I can tell by your voice this is an emergency, I'm telling the doctor. And we hung up the phone, and within less than 30 seconds, my phone rang, and it was her doctor, or it was one of the doctors in the practice saying, don't be afraid to call 911. And then he hung up the phone, and he called back he called back before I got to the on-ramp and said that he had called the emergency room, and that the doctors at the emergency room knew that we were coming and were expecting her, and basically he didn't actually say that she was going to be admitted. He said that they would take her right away and sort of to expect to be admitted, which I sort of expected. But I wasn't really sure because we've had so many different experiences at the ER. I mean, we've gone there with Maggie having seizures and not been admitted, and so it's been really hit and miss, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. And so we went to the ER, and it takes us half an hour to get there. I mean, we're like 30 miles away, and luckily walking outside really woke her up, so I could hear her talking to me, which made me feel safe to drive her. And we made it to the ER, and I got her out, and then she was really overtired and really upset. I was really thankful that the doctor called because it was super busy in the pediatric ER, and they kind of whisked us right back and put us in a room. And came in and took all the information and ended up admitting her to the pediatric ICU, which the last time she was admitted to the pediatric ICU was when she was 6 months old, and her first sleep study came back. They observed her all night, and she didn't have any more apneas while we were there, which wasn't really unexpected, because usually at home what we see is that being in the 70s for 5 or 10 minutes isn't going to hurt her. Like, we have kids here who are in the 70s for months, and like, yes, it's abnormal, and like what you're dealing with is abnormal, and they kind of were more like, it does look like you have found the cause of. They were looking through all of her charts and looking at all of like the whole entire long history. They could see all that we'd gone through and all of her sleep studies and all of her tests, and they're like, it's amazing that it looks like you guys have finally found the cause of this with the gene testing, and this is really abnormal, and it is abnormal for her to have desats into the 70s. Like, this is not a normal thing, and it's not a healthy thing, but it isn't doing her, it shouldn't be damaging her to be in the 70s for 10 minutes. So do what you're doing and just stay calm and rub her back and stimulate her and get her to wake up, and use whatever strategies you need. Like, now we know that if we take her outside into the temperature change of inside in an air-conditioned or heated house to outside in a hotter or colder house, that seemed to like really jolt her, give her a little bit of a jolt that woke her up when other things weren't working. So do whatever it takes to get her to wake up and kind of jolt her out of that apnea episode. And so I think that in itself was kind of worth it, to go in and kind of sit there with a team of doctors who was doing rounds and kind of pick their brains and ask them tons and tons of questions about her, both about her apneas, and also I asked them a bunch of questions about we've seen her have kind of nystagmus, ask them questions about that and get some kind of concrete answers about how to follow up beyond the suggestion of just taking her to the ER, because we live so far, both because we live far away and also because when we go to the ER it's not super helpful because it's already basically over. So I am glad that we went in to the ER, even though once we got there it was basically already over. She wasn't super pleased. Tessie, on the other hand, wasn't super pleased. She was really stressed out by being in the ER. When she got to the PICU, she was already asleep. By the time they wheeled her up to the PICU, she was asleep, and she woke up in the PICU and was like totally calm. It was like this was her place, and she woke up there and like looked around and started smiling and was cruising around her room like she remembered it. I don't think, obviously, I mean, she was 6 months old when she was there, but she was acting like she was right at home, climbing up on the chairs and eating her breakfast and acting like she knew everybody. So she was not afraid to be up there. And luckily she didn't, the only thing that she had to do was have a blood sugar test. That was the only poke. She got one poke, so I was really grateful for that. The last time she was there she had so many different tests. We follow up with her doctor. We're supposed to follow up with pulmonology again. And so I think I'm going to call genetics and ask them to tell us which pulmonologist is the best one for her to see, because they said that there was a pulmonologist that's really good with genetic stuff, and so I think that the best thing to do would be for us to switch to that pulmonologist, because we haven't had very good luck with pulmonology up until this point. So that is the latest update. We spent the night in the PICU and it was blessedly uneventful once we actually got there. Kind of rough at home. We finally settled in at 3 a.m. We woke up at 6, we were there until 10, kind of her being examined by everybody, and yeah, it looks like, I mean, everyone kind of seemed to think that it was, this seems like it's the genetic cause, mostly because there's no other explanation, and obviously it's happening. Like, they could see from the pictures of the monitors that I had taken while it was going on that she has these desaturations. If you're a parent and you have any sort of evidence like that, it's so helpful to be able to take pictures to show the doctors, because it really, really helps. It really, really helps them to be able to like actually see it. It just does. And so we survived and it's over, and hopefully this will be the sort of thing that if it happens again we really do have a 1 or 2 month break, because that's how it's been so far, where she seems to do really, really well for at least a few months, and I'm hoping that we continue on that way. And we have a month or two before she has another episode. And that is our monitor, but I just heard her talking a minute ago. She's supposed to be taking a nap right now. So my guess is that some little bunny just unhooked herself and hopped out of her crib, so I've got to go deal with that. Anyways, thanks for hanging out with me, and I've got to go deal with tiny bunnies who can unhook themselves from their monitors when they decide they're done with their nap. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you later. Hopefully under less stressful circumstances. Bye.